System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.
This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Today is Tuesday, August 25th. I'm Amin TMK alongside Amoja, Lil Tanky Sumler. Amoja, hello. Happy Tuesday.
What's good, everybody?
How are you doing?
What's good?
Yeah. What's good, everyone? Hello. Lots going on today. I just want to start with this real quick. We lost an icon, a working class icon. The great Dolly Parton passed today, and we just want to show Dolly some love. We were big fans, and let us know in the comments if you have any Dolly memories that you'd like to throw in there. Any comment on that, Tanky? Are you a big Dolly fan?
I'm the biggest Dolly fan. You know what I'm saying? Again, not the kind of thing that people would guess, right? Not necessarily her music, though I'm not against her music. It's more her life. You know what I'm saying? Of like, this was a very country person. Everybody knows I'm Southern. And just her approach to working people. Even I think about 9 to 5, those values, which at the time would have been considered just regular conservative values, right? Like those would be totally leftist values today, feeling like, the boss is stealing from you. You're not getting your fair shake, And I love that approach, right? She never really lost that connection to her Southern roots, which gave her kind of a down home she's like a real American product, the way that like Stan Lee is. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to say that there's going to be someone where like you don't have no opinion about Dolly Parton, and also it's the kind of thing where it's like, look, man, in the era of the internet, it's always a hater somewhere, what you don't know about her labor practices is, you know what I'm saying? But by and large, this is a person that really tried to live a life of ideals and a connection to working people, identified as a working person, even as they became an entrepreneur. It was it's so interesting because you and I were having a discussion about Dolly Parton maybe just a day or two ago, ironically, saying that, this is a person that's a little bit underrated in the American conversation. I definitely think about this person kind of as a comrade.
We were talking about her new gas station that she had just opened, and it was supposed to be in competition with Buc-ee's. If you know anything, look, for our non-American, maybe, or even our West Coast listeners, our Cali listeners, you might not know what a Buc-ee's is. And what it is a Walmart-style gas station filled with artisanal goods, bathrooms, showers, and it's kind of like a very fancy road stop. You can wash your car, right? Tons of delicious items to purchase. But Buc-ee's has kind of come out as like a supporter of MAGA, and that was kind of what her gas station was about.
Right.
She couldn't leave it to Beaver.
She couldn't leave it to Beaver. I was loving that.
That's a shot. That's we understand.
That's a real shot.
That's a sub right there. We know what that's about.
And again, just to your point, right? Like, I just want to, first off, as a creator, as an artist, as you also are, you understand that this is a person that wrote 10,000 songs in their lifetime.
Respect.
That's an incredible amount of production. As a creator, I'm here to tell you, I don't know if I got 10K in me as far as creation. I want to look just a little bit at these lyrics, though, right? 9 to 5. Tumble out of bed and stumble to the kitchen. Pour myself a cup of ambition. Yawn and stretch and try to come alive. Jump in the shower, blood starts pumping. Out on the street, traffic jumping. With folks like me on a job from 9 to 5. And like Elon Musk, he laughs at 9 to 5 hours now. What's that thing? Is like, I don't understand people that don't work 16 hours a day at their job. You know what I'm saying? Working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living, barely getting by. It's all taken and no given. They just use your mind and never give you credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it. Like, that's in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? And the labor force is just infinitely worse now than it was then.
Exactly. Yeah. So shout out to Dolly, RIP. We're going to keep a lookout for Buc-ee's and see if there's any nefarious play. Let's say foul play, because she was looking spry when I seen her not too long ago. So I'm just saying.
Ukrainians did it, man. It's the Ukrainians.
Yeah. They could have
they're attacking all the energy resources around the world. There was a new energy magnate taking shape in the face and form of Dolly Parton.
We are here to start incredible conspiracy theories based on very little evidence. Okay, let's dive into the discussion of today. We appreciate all of our. Oh, wait a minute! I have another thing I got to preface. If you're listening to this, you're probably watching us on YouTube, and you are probably listening to us on a not Spotify or. I don't know what happened. Spotify has taken our site down or our page down. We're trying to figure out why. I think I know why. I hate to be that type of person where I'm just always like going to us being deplatformed, but migrate over to someplace else. You can always hit us up on our Podbean. Anyway, okay. Let's move forward.
No, it is important to acknowledge, though, and it's more important than ever that y'all signal boost. You know what I'm saying? Of course, there's going to be people like, why were you on Spotify anyway? And it's like, you have to go to where the people are. I think that's a very important thing to understand in praxis. More people get their podcasts from Spotify than any other place. We're not exclusively on Spotify. Thank freaking God. You know what I'm saying? But most of the people that look for podcasts, that's where they go. So those of y'all that's still on podcast, on them, definitely, man, raise up a stink. You know what I'm saying? Those of y'all that's getting us other places, please continue to signal boost because motherfuckers is hating, yo.
And it's this time. Yeah. No, I mean, well said. Absolutely well said. And yeah, we push on, we bang on, as they say in England. Okay. Let's talk about Scott Bassett. This is a big, big news story. I'm going to play this clip, and Tanky, I'd love to just get your response. A little bit of a longer clip, but I think it's important.
We're launching Operation Economic Outcast to foreclose every other option available to the Iranian regime. Treasury has mapped every node, every facilitator, and every network that Iran has used to smuggle oil and evade sanctions. Beginning today, the actions of Treasury and other agencies will tighten the noose and block every potential source of revenue that funds the IRGC and the evil Iranian regime. We are enforcing a zero leakage approach. There will be no minimal breathing space for the regime to rebuild its capacity to inflict terror against America and the world. The final refuge of this regime is a mistaken conclusion of nations that still finance the Iranian threat in the hopes of evading it. It is no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this conflict. Countries cannot claim they are blind to enabling this activity. Iran's enablers purchase, transport its petroleum. They facilitate the flow of its finances through exchange houses and free trade zones. They welcome Iran's flights and maintain registries on its behalf. They turn a blind eye to seaborne fuel transfers and overland transits. They condone illicit use of their banks, all the while concealing the extent of their complicity. The president is making phone calls to world leaders with specific requests to cease their interactions with the regime. We are already seeing results. Over the weekend, comments from Iranian leadership clearly acknowledged the effect of this campaign, and nations that facilitate any interactions with the regime should quickly heed our message. Those who stand with the United States will reap the rewards of our partnership. Those who tether themselves to the Iranian regime should expect to share in the isolation of a withering regime. Teams from Treasury, State and the U.S. military are now meeting with their global counterparts to tell them that the United States expects action. Every country has a defined timeline to shut down activities we have identified. If they do not take action, we will do so unilaterally through Treasury authorities. For example, every branch of Bank Melee must be shuttered and dark. And let me be clear, any entity that facilitates money laundering on behalf of Iran will be removed from the US dollar system.
So, I mean, to me, that's just
Sorry, go ahead.
To me, that's just a straight up attack on the BRIC system, right? So once again, y'all have to, when we continue to say everything that you see really has very little to do with Iran and has to do with great game politics, this is not really so much as it looks like an attack on Iran, but an attack on the Chinese system, the SIPs, which is a whole nother way of, it competes, right, against the American system. What is that, the system that allows you to use, MasterCard, allows you to use Visa, right? That is an entire economical system that is predicated on credit and dollar. The SIPS system is predicated on international exchange, not through the dollar primarily, but of course also with specific interest on the Chinese renminbi, right? Which is, remember, when the war began, the Iranians made everyone coming out of the Gulf pay in renminbi, right? So this is, once again, that's them utilizing that SIP system, which circumvents the American system, from which you can easily interdict a payment. You can steal wallets, right? These are the kind of things that Scott Besson talks about often. It's harder to invoke that type of power against people that are working throughout the Chinese system. And so what that means is, in essence, any country that does any business with Iran, the Americans are threatening through secondary sanctions to cut off your access to the dollar. In other words, if you have reserve currency in the American system or treasury bond, for example, it allows them the right to confiscate that. So again, think about this. As Scott Besson has done everything he can to shore up treasuries, one thing that looks like it would be a very simple solution is, okay, it looks like Pakistan is still doing business with the Iranians through land border crossings. It looks like the Iranians are muling, right? The fact that we're talking about petroleum the way we talk about drugs is also a fascinating thing. Illicit petroleum, right? It's sanctioned because the United States says it's sanctioned. It's not sanctioned by the United Nations or anything like that. There's no mandate globally for people not to do business with Iran. So the Americans are saying anyone that participates in commerce with Iran on any level, we threaten to cut you off from the American dollar system. Most of the countries that are aligned in the BRIC system are already prepared to deal with that to some degree or another. But no one is in a position like China or Russia where like you can just weather the loss of like $180 billion in treasury, because the Americans take it and apply it conceivably towards debt or whatever they use it for. And so it's a big threat. And we'll see how it plays out. But in many ways, a lot of people are just estimating that it's a desperate act that will further the global trend of de-dollarization. And if that happens, the Americans lose everything. So it's actually a really dangerous card to play because you're daring other countries to continue to do business with Iran over a product that everyone in the world needs, petroleum and petroleum distillates.
And you talking in a real way like, and this is how it's going to be. We were watching big, I don't want to say big comic book fans, but we're normal comic book fans. You got to take a step away from Marvel. Got to take a step away from WB. Well, anyway, we're still doing it, I guess. But we were watching the cartoon version, Batman versus Robin. And one of the things, that the Council of Owls were saying was, look, it's either him or me. You got to choose. And as you saw, it was very difficult for Damian to be given that choice because although he is siding with you and the group of owls at this point, he doesn't want to kill Bruce Wayne.
Nobody wants to have terms dictated to them, especially at gunpoint. This is economic gunpoint. This is the Secretary of the American Treasury saying, we'll use whatever measures we feel fit, up to and including revoking your access to dollars and confiscating any dollar assets that you have. And this is a real threat. We have the ICC, the president of the ICC is under sanctions by the Americans. And so they're not able to use the SWIFT system. Again, that's the American economic system. There's nowhere in the world where she can use a debit card, right, that uses the SWIFT system. So like when you talk about that applied on a countrywide level, it's quite a disruption. And very few countries would be in a position where they could risk such a huge like even a country like Brazil, it would be very hard for Brazil to be thrown off the dollar, where they don't have access to any American products, right? So it's a really big threat. But there are some countries that are immediately, the Chinese have already said, we're not going to honor these secondary sanctions. In fact, it would be illegal in China right now to honor them because the Chinese government has said, you don't let the Americans dictate your economic policy. We do that, and so that's already set up to be quite a conflict. And before you say like, oh, they could just take the Chinese investment, that would literally destroy the global economy. And even Scott Besson himself has acknowledged that, right? When you're talking about China's total assets, Japan owns over $1 trillion worth of treasury, right? If you look at the Chinese investment, as in like the Chinese state, you're talking about over $670 billion worth of American treasuries. And then Hong Kong, which again is part of China, has an additional $200 billion worth of treasuries. So you're talking about close to $1 trillion that could just be stolen, right? Like that's going to be an act of war. And again, the president has already said, he reserves a right up to and including, military force to enforce these new sanctions. So when he's saying D-Day, it's a weird metaphor because you don't announce that D-Day happens. It just happens, and he's threatening, like, oh, we're giving these countries a certain amount of time to comply,
It's like I've heard this before, though, right? Yeah. Like, oh, hey, look, if they don't do what we're telling them to do right now, I might end the civilization. I'm about to go berserk. I'm about to go crazy on you guys right now.
And so just 2 comments on that, right? So one, it demonstrates that the American military adventure in Iran has not gone to plan, or else they wouldn't be forced to utilize these type of mechanisms. And the last thing I'll say about it is it still assumes there won't be an Iranian response to this. Like they're just going to let this happen when the Iranians have already demonstrated the capacity and willingness to defend themselves in these type of matters. And they've now stated as a record that they've moved past just simply defense, right? That they could go on and take offensive measures in these type of events.
They're going to start shooting threes.
This is absolutely an act of war.
Yeah, no, it's no more defense. We're not protecting the paint anymore. Yeah. We're going on offense. Steph Curry, we're shooting threes, okay? Much to the chagrin of those who love the game in the 90s, but it is a game of threes. Let's add some more to this. Shall we? This is from the Kobayashi letter. I'm going to read this. Excuse me. Excuse me there. All right. Hedge funds are ramping up bets against the U.S. dollar. 1 month risk reversals on the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index are down to negative 0.25, their lowest since February. This measures the difference in demand between bullish and bearish dollar options. By comparison, the metric was positive from March through July, making a sharp reversal in positioning over the last few weeks. Furthermore, demand for U.S. dollar was put options versus the euro was 47% higher than the US dollar calls on August 21st, according to the Depository Trust and Clearing Core data. Meanwhile, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index has declined 2.8% over the last 2 months to its lowest since May. And we talked a little bit about this, and we kind of so funny because it's again going to this idea of we are going to sanction people because we don't want them to use the US dollar, which is leading to a weakened US dollar. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely, because here's the thing. I think that the hedging information was very important. What it shows is people that have great amounts of money, great wealth, and also countries, right? You tend to be risk averse. You see what I'm saying? Like a millionaire, you might be willing to take, let's take huge risks. I want to get that billion. When you're a billionaire, you become incredibly risk averse. I don't need to do very risky financial adventures, right? Anything there's a potential for loss. And so what they're seeing now is as Besant makes these kind of threats, that represents a potential for loss for them. Because everyone has to wonder, when will it be my turn? And so countries that are not, in the crosshairs right now, they're still going to slowly, quietly begin to sell their positions, their dollar positions. Countries like Saudi Arabia, right? United Arab Emirates. Even though on paper you think about these guys as huge American vassal states, these are still, at the end of the day, run by petty billionaires, right, that have hereditary titles. And they don't want to lose their money either, When you look at the relationship, think, for example, someone like Mohammed bin Salman, that's already had an incredibly complicated relationship with the Americans. Him and Joe Biden famously didn't even like each other. So what happens when the next president comes in that doesn't like Mohammed bin Salman and threatens to then freeze, Saudi assets, right? These guys are going to do what they can, even as vassals and potential paper allies to the Americans, to hedge their positions. Maybe sell $10 billion worth of American Federal Reserve notes and buy $5 billion worth of euros, $5 billion worth of renminbi, right? Just to keep, diversify your assets, right? Straight Wu-Tang, right? This is going to happen on a country level. These kind of moves frighten people because whatever reason you come up with for why you stole the money, it doesn't change the effective clause. Aristotle talked about the effective clause a lot. At the end of the day, you stole this money that someone trusted into an American bank that is now magically gone, and the Russians went through this first. When the Americans seized their $300 billion, the Americans and the Europeans seized $300 billion worth of Russian sovereign wealth. Every other country has to make you nervous.
One more thing I want to discuss, at least big subjects. For me, that is going to be this
remains on the table if things were to get worse.
Sorry,
what would worse look like? Do you have a line in mind already?
Well, if it gets really, really bad, I say everything's on the table.
So that was Ontario Premier.
Everything remains on the.
There we go. Thank you, StreamYard. So this is from Megatron Ron. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says Canada is going to throw everything on the U.S., including sanctions on electricity, fuel, uranium. He says Canada will put massive pain on U.S. President Trump. I'm going to get his kind of full speech here, and we'll just get your response.
And you mentioned that everything remains on the table if things were to get worse. What would worse look like? Do you have a line in mind already?
Well, if it gets really, really bad, I say everything's on the table. I cannot speak for other premiers, but a couple premiers have a lot of power to protect Canada, massive power. And I can't speak for them, but we need everyone to be on Team Canada and throw everything in the kitchen sink at them, no matter if it's electricity, if it's fuel, again, if it's potash or uranium. We need to have everything on the table, but we need a buy-in from coast to coast to coast. And we'll work together with the other premiers. I know the Prime Minister will, but we could put massive pain on the U.S. President Trump underestimates us, and that's the biggest mistake, underestimating your opponent.
The Prime Minister, I think Carney, he also said today that Canada and Europe they're going to work together because their biggest qualities is being trustworthy. So a little bit of drama there from Canada. Kind of just leave me your thoughts on that and just what's going on.
They're products that will always sell. I just don't care what you feel about the quote unquote regime, right? What you feel about the country, right? Those things are irrelevant as it comes to international business. Petroleum is one of those things. Okay. So again, this is one of those things where people think about America as a huge oil producer, and it is, but what it does mostly is it sells that oil on the market. And so for the American market, they are actually net energy importers. It's hard for the average American to believe, but it's actually true. The American appetite for energy is just far beyond anything that our native capacity can handle. So let's look at monthly volumes of selected energy commodities, right? When you talk about like Canada, this is from like January 23rd to like May 25th, okay? America, when you're talking about millions of barrels per day, America exports to Canada, less than 1 million barrels per day. It exports petroleum products, right, which is different from like just crude, right? Again, a little bit less than 1 million barrels per day. Natural gas, it's about 5 billion cubic feet per day. Okay, a little bit under 5. That's what they export. That's what they send out. Now, when we're talking about just Canada alone, America, as far as like the crude oil, it's about 4 million barrels per day that America is importing from Canada, right? Again, as opposed to less than 1 million barrels per day that they're exporting to Canada. Okay, when you're talking about petroleum products, they're almost dead even. America imports very close to what they export, a little bit less than 1 million barrels per day. Again, now when you're looking at natural gas, it's just not even close. The Americans from 23 to 25, this is consistent. This isn't just something like, since the Iranian war, the Americans have imported anywhere from 5 to 10 billion cubic feet a day imported from Canada, as opposed to what they're exporting. So the numbers are not even close. Like, Ford is not wrong in saying that America has to play ball in this way. Because again, if America doesn't buy that petroleum, especially right now, someone will. South Korea will. Japan will. China will. The EU will. So this is not one of those things where America can just straight up flatly dictate, even though when you're talking about like as far as like the power of cultures, it's not even close. Like China has cities that have more population than the entire country of Canada. Canada's population is a little bit under 30 million, somewhere around that number. Whereas America's is almost 250 million, culturally, militarily, economically, in every way that matters. America is by far a more powerful entity. But Canada is not so small that America can dictate these terms because they have a product that is a universal global product that will never fail to sell. And Americans would have to cover that loss. Right. And with the American mind state, that's like zero sum game. Not only are they now losing that, they're no longer buying this oil from Canada. To the American mind state, they're losing that oil to whoever they sell it to. They're losing that oil to the EU. They're losing that oil to Japan. God forbid they're losing that oil to China.
Yep. And Canada, I think I can't remember who said it, whether it was the prime minister or not, but they were like, we're not the 51st state. But remember, Trump has kind of already come in and hinted at Canada to becoming the 51st state, Cuba being the 51st state, Venezuela being the 51st state, Greenland being the 51st state, and the Strait of Hormuz being the 51st state. So he's got a lot of options out there in terms of what he wants to add to American territory and make it that awkward 51st state. Got to bring all the flags back and send them back out with that 51st. But yeah, pretty much economic D-Day, all this other stuff being thrown out there. And of course, we're going to be there to monitor it the entire time. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners, if we have any. I know that we do have some stats left on there. You can always check out our Podbean site. And they also have an app. That way there will always be in your feed. But again, like Tanky said, we go where the people are. And I always feel it's a little bit victim blamey when people like, you shouldn't have been on Spotify in the first place. It's like, don't blame us. You can listen to it and there's all kinds of podcast apps that we're on. So anyway, it's just unfortunate because we're not the only leftist group or whatever you want to call the style of politics that we have.
I happen to be a leftist. TMK happens to be a leftist. But what we provide for you is geopolitical news. The news is not left or right. The news is the news.
Yeah, and it's like, why? I don't get why they are so hype about shutting us down. We're not even a big podcast. It's not like we got like 100,000 views. We have, thousands, yes, of course, but of course. But, it's like the fact that they're so worried about what we're talking about. And we're literally just a small, another small but mighty group of leftists trying to make sense of the world. But we're now not allowed to be on these platforms. Anyway, shout out to the podcast listeners. Patreon.com/InnerCityLeft. We love y'all like cook food. Y'all the real heroes. Fables, foibles, other American sins. Link in the description. Tomorrow we will be dropping something. Let's go ahead and just put that up there.
Tap in.
Shot. It's going to be, we haven't put one out together in a while. We kind of release one, one here, one there all the time, but it's never kind of like, it's been a while since we personally got one dropped. Let's see if I can get this thing in here. Boom. Tomorrow, fuck is they talking about? Pick that up. Yeah. What am I missing? Anything that I'm missing? Tanky thoughts, final thoughts.
Man, I wonder what it is that really got them all pissed off. It's got to be talking about these bubbles, man, because that's the real threat. Like, I think it's important that they just always want that understanding that Americans are winning everything, and I think loving the place where you at is about being honest. Like, you can't correct course if you don't talk about what's wrong. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, we were ranked in the top 77 political podcasts, by the way. Leftist political podcasts. So that's cool.
That truth from a place of love, place of love. But I'll punch you in the fucking face if you step up wrong.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm peaceful, not harmless.
There it is.
But let's keep the peace. But let's create the peace. Because you can't keep the peace unless you can create it. Okay, anyway.
There it is.
For Amoja, Little Tanky Summer, I'm Amin TMK. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.